Throughout English history, there have been many people who have been victims of the terror and evil of kings and queens. Henry VIII, for example, executed 70,000 people inside of his own kingdom, roughly 3% of the population of England at the time. Most people knew of someone who had lost their lives on the gallows, by the executioner's axe or by being hanged, drawn and quartered. Henry even sentenced an 11-year-old girl to death, and she was hanged on the gallows in front of a large crowd in her hometown of Munchwenlock, in Shropshire. It's not known what Alice Glaston, that young girl, did, though some theorise she was accused of witchcraft. But during the reign of King Charles I, the tyrant ruler who plunged his country into civil war, the Stuart king sentenced an 8-year-old boy to death, and this young child was executed in public. John Dean is known in England for being the youngest person to be condemned to death for his actions. But how did this happen, and why did this happen? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Charles I was known as a terrible king. He argued constantly with Parliament and refused to accept their wishes or demands, and this culminated in the English Civil War, the bloodiest conflict ever to be fought on English soil. Charles was executed himself in public in London in 1649, but 20 years earlier his government and country sentenced an 8 or 9-year-old boy to death. John Dean was born in 1620, and he grew up in the region around Windsor. We say grew up, but little is known about his early life except for his demise. He was brought to the Abingdon Assize Courts in 1629 for the crimes of arson. The crime of arson was incredibly serious throughout English history, as it was seen as an attack upon someone's property and wealth, and also their status. It carried the death penalty. He was allegedly brought to the court on February 23rd, 1629, and the age of criminal responsibility in England at the time was just 7 years old, meaning that as he was a year older than this, he was able to be charged for his crimes. At the time, it was said, death sentences were certainly routinely passed on 7 to 13-year-old children, but equally routinely commuted. Girls were only typically hanged for the most serious crimes, whereas teenage boys were executed for a wide range of felonies. Relating to the crimes of John Dean, he was accused of setting fire to 2 barns or houses in the nearby town of Windsor. It was not known if anyone was hurt or injured in the fire that John Dean allegedly started, but the judge who oversaw the trial claimed that Dean showed malice, revenge, craft and cunning. Because of this, he was found guilty. Even at the time, people in the local area were shocked when they found out that a young child was condemned to death and had been sentenced to death. Specifically, he was sentenced to be hanged in public, and shortly after his trial, he was taken into Abingdon, where a gallows stood on a platform, and he was led onto the scaffold. The executioner had likely never hanged a young child, and he helped Dean onto the stool, and then in front of the crowd, the death sentence was read out. After this, the executioner secured the noose around his neck and then kicked out the stool, and the young boy was left hanging. At this time in history, there was no drop used at all when it came to public executions on the gallows, and the method of death was a slow strangulation, meaning that many people had seen the youngest person executed in England to be executed, and he may have took many minutes to be declared dead. It's likely that he was then buried inside of a common grave or an unmarked grave inside of Abingdon, or that his body was left inside of a pit. At the time in England, executions had to be signed off on by the monarchy or on behalf of the monarch by a member of the Privy Council. So this means that it's very possible and probable that King Charles I would have been informed about the fate of John Dean, especially as the crime took place in Windsor, close to where his castle was. The execution of the 8 or 9-year-old child shows the danger and brutality of living in the 17th century. Within a number of decades, the English Civil War would take place, and more bloodshed would happen on English soil. But it was relatively normal for in England for someone to be executed for the crime of arson. And what differentiates John Dean, despite his age, is the fact the judge outlined that he allegedly showed malice, revenge, craft and cunning. It was that element that sent him to the gallows, despite many death sentences of children at the time being mercifully overturned. But today in history, John Dean is remembered for being the youngest person to be executed in Britain, and his fate is one which is harrowing. In the grand history of Earth, the fact an 8-year-old boy went to the gallows in a period of time not too long ago shows the brutality of the times. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And once again, thank you so much for watching.